Linda Harper always believed she knew her daughter better than anyone. Chloe was quiet, kind, and incapable of harm more. So Linda thought, but the night she saw Chloe slip out of the house and vanish into the darkness, something inside her began to break. Each secret Linda uncovered pulled her deeper into a nightmare she couldn't escape. By the time she learned the truth, her perfect daughter had become the center of a horrifying crime that would destroy them both. Linda Harper had always believed she was living the kind of life people envied from the outside. Her house stood neatly on the corner of Maplewood Lane, painted white with light blue shutters and a rose garden that always seemed to bloom just right. She worked part-time at the local library, loved baking on weekends, and spent her evenings curled up on the couch with her daughter Chloe. To anyone who passed by, they were the picture of peace and perfection just. A mother and daughter building a quiet life together after her husband's death 5 years earlier. Linda had poured all her love and attention into Chloe, determined to give her the kind of stability every child deserved. Chloe was 17, graceful in her own quiet way, and had a smile that could disarm even the most guarded hearts. She was top of her class, volunteered at the animal shelter, and never gave Linda reason to worry. The neighbors often praised her, calling her the perfect daughter. Linda would smile, proud, but also a little uneasy. There was something about Chloe she never fully understood, something distant, as though her daughter's mind lived behind a locked door. She would sometimes find Chloe staring out of her bedroom window late at night, expressionless, her eyes fixed on the dark trees beyond the backyard. When Linda asked what she was thinking, Chloe would shrug, say nothing, and go back to her books. Linda tried to believe her. As autumn settled over the town, the days grew shorter, and the air turned cool enough to carry the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. One night, Linda woke up to the faint creak of the back door. The clock on her nightstand read 12:47 a.m. at first. She thought she had imagined it, but then she heard soft footsteps on the porch. Slipping out of bed, she moved quietly to the hallway and peeked through the window by the stairs. In the silvery glow of the moon, she saw a Chloe hoodie pulled tight over her head, backpack slung across her shoulder disappearing down the narrow street that led toward the woods. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to call out, but something stopped her. Maybe it was fear of what the answer might be. Maybe she didn't want to shatter the illusion that everything was fine. She told herself it must be harmless. Maybe Chloe was meeting a friend. Maybe she needed space. Maybe it was nothing at all. But deep inside, Linda's heart tightened with dread. She waited by the window for what felt like an eternity. When Chloe finally returned, the clock read almost 2. Her hoodie was smeared with mud, her shoes soaked, and there was a faint smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. Without a word, she went straight upstairs and closed her door. Linda sat awake the rest of the night, unable to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She told herself that teenagers did strange things sometimes. Maybe Chloe had gone for a walk to clear her head, or perhaps to meet a friend in secret. But something about the way her daughter moved, quiet, deliberate, almost mechanical, felt wrong. Over the next few days, small things began to stand out. Chloe's hands had tiny scratches on them, the kind that looked like they came from branches or rough ground. Her eyes seemed heavier, shadowed by something unspoken. Linda noticed her daughter spending more time alone, locking her door more often, and flinching whenever her phone buzzed. The warmth that once filled the house began to fade, replaced by a quiet tension that pressed against every corner of the rooms. Linda told herself to stop worrying, that she was being paranoid. But, deep down, she knew that something in their perfect world had shifted. It was as if the girl she had raised, the one who used to laugh over burned cookies and movie nights, had begun to vanish, leaving behind someone Linda could barely recognize. And though she didn't techno eat yet, that single night the sound of the door creaking open, the sight of her daughter walking into the dark had already set in motion a chain of events that would destroy everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and family. The morning after Chloe's mysterious trip into the night, Brooksville felt different. The streets were unusually quiet, and the faint hum of normal life seemed replaced by a low current of tension. As Linda poured herself a cup of coffee, she noticed her phone buzzing with messages from the neighborhood group chat. A teenage boy named Ryan Mitchell had gone missing. He was 17 just. Like Chloe and attended the same high school. The last person to see him reported that he left a party near the old train tracks late last night and never made it home. Linda's fingers tightened around her mug. She looked across the kitchen at Chloe, who sat at the table eating cereal, her face pale and distant. When Linda mentioned Ryan's name, her daughter didn't look up. She simply nodded, muttered something about how terrible it was, and left her breakfast half finished. The spoon clattered against the bowl, and the sound lingered like an echo. That day, the town buzzed with speculation. Flyers with Ryan's smiling face appeared on street poles, gas stations, and cafe windows. The search teams organized through the local police, with volunteers walking through the woods and nearby fields. Brooksville wasn't a place used to tragedy, and the sudden disappearance left everyone uneasy. Parents kept their children close, and neighbors locked their doors earlier than usual. Linda watched the news updates each evening, hoping for anything that would end the uncertainty. She kept glancing at Chloe, who seemed withdrawn, barely touching her meals, often locking herself in her room. The girl who once loved baking cookies and humming to old songs now sat in silence, scrolling through her phone with vacant eyes. There was something fragile about her now, like a secret waiting to break free. A few nights later, Linda couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the windows, and a faint drizzle tapped against the roof. Restless, she walked to the living room and noticed Chloe's backpack slumped near the couch. It was half unzipped, and inside, she saw something glinting faintly under the lamplight. She reached in and pulled out a small silver bracelet engraved with the letter R. Linda's breath caught. She had seen that bracelet before on the missing posters, on Ryan's wrist in every photo. The bracelet was distinctive, a gift he'd reportedly worn since his 16th birthday. Her hands trembled as she held it. Questions collided in her mind, each one darker than the last. How could Chloe have it? Were they friends? Was it just something she found? She tried to convince herself there was a simple answer, but deep down, her instincts screamed otherwise. She placed the bracelet back exactly where she found it, zipped the bag shut, and sat on the couch staring into the darkness. The next morning, she searched Chloe's face for answers. Her daughter looked exhausted, her eyes ringed with shadows, her hands shaking slightly as she poured orange juice. Linda almost said something, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she accuse her only child of something so unthinkable? Later that afternoon, the police announced they had found Ryan's phone near the train tracks, smashed and muddy. They believed foul play might be involved. The news sent a chill through the town and through Linda's bones. She looked at Chloe, who stood by the window, staring blankly into the gray sky. For a moment, Linda thought she saw tears forming, but Chloe quickly turned away. That night, Linda dreamt of the woods, the sound of footsteps, the crack of branches, the faint smell of smoke. She woke in a panic, her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she feared most were closer than she wanted to believe. The next day, as she folded laundry in Chloe's room, Linda noticed something under the bed, a crumpled piece of fabric stained with what looked like dried mud. She picked it up carefully. It was a hoodie, dark and torn at the sleeve. The same hoodie Chloe had worn that night. Linda sat on the floor, clutching the hoodie, her thoughts spiraling. The image of the bracelet, the late-night walks, the silence, it all began to connect, piece by terrifying piece. Something had happened in those woods, and somehow her daughter was part of it. She didn't know the full truth yet, but one thing was certain. The girl she thought she knew was hiding something, and the weight of that secret was slowly crushing them both. For days, Linda could not stop thinking about what she had found. The bracelet, The hoodie, the strange silence in Chloe's eyes, all of it pressed against her mind like a stone she couldn't move. She went about her routine, pretending nothing was wrong. But every time she looked at her daughter, her stomach twisted with dread. She had raised this child, watched her take her first steps, soothed her nightmares, and cheered at every school recital. Yet now, she wasn't sure who Chloe really was. The more she tried to convince herself it was all a misunderstanding, the louder the doubts became. One cold evening, a week after Ryan's disappearance, Linda decided she needed to know the truth. The air outside was thick with mist, the kind that made everything look distant and ghostly. When she heard Chloe's door open just after midnight, Linda stood silently by her window, her heart pounding. She watched as her daughter crept across the lawn again, dressed in dark clothes, a flashlight in hand. This time, Linda grabbed her coat and followed, staying far enough behind to remain unseen. The streets were empty. The only sound, the crunch of gravel under their shoes. Chloe walked past the train tracks and into the woods, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Linda hesitated at the tree line, then followed quietly, her breath visible in the cold air. The forest was still except for the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of dead leaves underfoot. After a few minutes, Linda saw the faint flicker of light ahead. It was coming from an old cabin near the creek, a place she hadn't seen used in years. Its roof sagged, and its windows were broken. But inside, a faint orange glow moved like a ghost across the walls. Through the cracked window, Linda saw her daughter kneeling on the dusty floor, lighting candles one by one. In front of her lay a small box, a stack of photographs, and what looked like pieces of torn clothing. The sight made Linda's knees weaken. She pressed her hand against the wooden wall, trying to steady herself. The smell of burning paper drifted through the air. Chloe was feeding the photos into a small fire she had made in a tin container, watching each one curl and turn to ash. Linda caught a glimpse of one before it burned completely. It was Ryan, smiling, his arm around Chloe. The flames reflected in Chloe's eyes as she sat there, motionless, watching the past disappear. Linda's breath hitched, a mix of fear and heartbreak coursing through her. What had her daughter done? What was she trying to erase? Linda wanted to rush in, to grab her and demand answers, but something inside her told her not to move. The girl in that cabin didn't look like her daughter anymore. She looked like a stranger. When the last photo was gone, Chloe placed the box into a hole in the dirt floor and began covering it with soil, her movements slow and deliberate. Linda felt her body tense with panic, but she stayed hidden until Chloe blew out the candles and left the cabin. Only after her daughter's footsteps faded did Linda step inside. The air was heavy with smoke and damp earth. She knelt near the spot where Chloe had buried the box, her hands trembling as she brushed the dirt away. She didn't dig it up. She couldn't bring herself to, but the sight of the freshly disturbed ground was enough to confirm what her heart already knew. When Linda finally returned home, dawn was beginning to break. The birds were starting to sing, the world waking as if nothing had changed. But for Linda, everything had. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands still stained with dirt, and stared at the floor. Fear pulsed through her in waves. Whatever was buried in that cabin wasn't just a box. It was the truth, and it was far darker than she was ready to face. That morning when Chloe came down for breakfast, she looked calm, even. She smiled faintly and asked if Linda had slept well. Linda only nodded, unable to speak. As she watched her daughter sip orange juice, she realized the person sitting across from her was a mystery, someone capable of keeping secrets that could destroy lives. The perfect image of her family was gone forever, replaced by a terrifying question that haunted every breath she took. What had Chloe done in those woods, and how much more was she hiding? The discovery of the body shattered the calm of Brooksville. Early one morning, the news broke that a group of hikers had stumbled upon a shallow grave near the creek, not far from where the old cabin stood. Police confirmed it was Ryan Mitchell. The town fell into shock. People left flowers by the school fence, News vans lined the streets, and reporters swarmed the sidewalks searching for anyone willing to talk. The once quiet suburb became a place of whispers and unease, every conversation filled with speculation and fear. Linda sat in her living room as the announcement played on television. Her body went numb. She didn't need the police to say more. She already knew the truth. Her mind returned to the sight of Chloe in that cabin, the dirt-covered box, the photos burning in silence, every image replayed with unbearable clarity. Across the room, Chloe was on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't spoken much since the discovery, moving through the house like a ghost. That evening, 2 police officers arrived at their door. Linda's heart raced as she opened it. They were polite but firm, asking to speak with Chloe. Someone had reported seeing a girl matching her description near the woods the night Ryan disappeared. The air inside the house grew thick with tension. Chloe stood quietly while they questioned her. Her answers were calm, practiced, and emotionless. She said she had been home all night, studying, and that she didn't know Ryan well. Linda stood behind her, barely breathing. When the officers left, she felt an overwhelming wave of relief and then, immediately, guilt. She wanted to protect her daughter, but the weight of the secret was suffocating her. That night, after Chloe went to bed, Linda crept into her room again. She didn't know what she was looking for, maybe proof that she was wrong, something that could make all of this go away. But when she lifted the loose floorboard beneath the window, she found an envelope sealed with tape. Inside were photos of Ryan and Chloe together, smiling, sitting by the creek, walking down the school hallway hand in hand. Each picture was dated within the last 2 months. Linda's heart cracked with every photo she turned. At the bottom of the envelope, folded neatly, was a handwritten note. The ink had smudged slightly, but the words were still clear. He said he'd never tell anyone. He lied. Linda stared at the note until the letters blurred through her tears. Her hands trembled as she put everything back and replaced the floorboard. She sat on the edge of Chloe's bed, the room dimly lit by the moon, and felt an ache she couldn't describe. She had raised this child, loved her fiercely, and yet somehow hadn't seen what was festering inside her. Over the next few days, the investigation intensified. Police combed through Ryan's last known locations, questioned classmates, and gathered evidence from the woods. Rumors spread through the school. Some said Ryan and Chloe had been secretly dating. Others whispered that they had fought at the party that night. Linda tried to go about her daily life, but the guilt consumed her. She watched Chloe closely, noting every movement, every glance. Her daughter was quieter than ever, her face expressionless, her energy drained. One night, Linda found Chloe sitting at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring blankly at nothing. A half-empty glass of water sat beside her. When Linda asked if she was okay, Chloe nodded but didn't speak. The silence between them was unbearable. The next morning, Linda made a decision. She couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't live under the same roof with a secret that big. The truth needed to come out, even if it destroyed them both. She picked up the phone to call the police, but her hand froze before she could dial. What would she say? That she had followed her daughter, that she had seen her burning photos and hiding things in the ground. Would anyone even believe her? She put the phone down, her chest tightening with helplessness. In that moment, she realized she was trapped between 2 unbearable choices: protect her daughter and live with the guilt, or expose her and lose her forever. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Linda sat there, staring at her trembling hands, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The illusion of the perfect life was gone, and only the truth remained, waiting to tear apart what was left of her heart. 2 days later, the knock on the door came just after sunrise. Linda had barely slept, her mind looping through the same unbearable thoughts. She opened the door to find 2 detectives standing there, their faces solemn. They told her that new evidence had surfaced: footprints near the creek, matched the same brand of shoes Chloe owned, and traces of Ryan's DNA had been found on a torn piece of fabric discovered in the woods. They asked if Chloe was home. Linda's throat went dry. She nodded slowly and called for her daughter, her voice trembling. Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs, calm and quiet as if she had been expecting this moment all along. The detectives spoke to her gently, but their questions were firm. They asked about the night Ryan disappeared, about their relationship, about the items found in the forest. Chloe didn't cry or protest. She simply stared at the floor, her face pale and unreadable. When they told her she needed to come with them for further questioning, she nodded once, slipped on her shoes, and followed them out the door. Linda stood frozen, her hands clutching the doorway, unable to speak. She watched as her daughter was guided into the police car, the flashing lights reflecting off her blank face. The hours that followed were a blur. Linda sat at the kitchen table, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She thought of the nights she had stayed up worrying about scraped knees and unfinished homework, never imagining that one day she would be sitting alone in a house filled with evidence of something monstrous. The phone finally rang in the afternoon. It was the police. They told her Chloe had confessed. Not right away, but after hours of silence, something inside her broke. She told them everything. Chloe said she and Ryan had been seeing each other in secret for months. They had met at the animal shelter and bonded quickly. But Ryan had wanted to end things. He was afraid people would find out, afraid of how it might look. Chloe couldn't handle the rejection. The night of the party, they argued near the creek. Ryan told her it was over, that he was done lying. In the moment of anger and panic, she hit him with a rock. He fell, and when he didn't get up, she realized what she had done. She tried to wake him, to fix it somehow. But it was too late. Terrified, she dragged his body toward the cabin and buried him near the creek, hiding his things so no one would find them. Then she burned their photos to erase what was left of their relationship. When Linda arrived at the police station, Chloe was sitting alone in an interview room. She looked small and fragile, her hands folded on the table. For a moment, Linda almost didn't recognize her. This wasn't the bright, smiling girl she had raised. This was someone else. Someone hollowed out by guilt and fear. Linda wanted to rush in, to hold her, to take it all away. But the glass between them made her realize she couldn't fix this. No one could. The following weeks passed in a haze. The story spread across the state, painting Chloe as a troubled teenager who had snapped under emotional pressure. Neighbors whispered. Teachers avoided eye contact, and Linda found herself shrinking from the world she once loved. When the trial began, she sat in the courtroom every day, her hands clasped together, staring at her daughter, while the prosecution recounted every horrifying detail. Chloe barely looked up. She listened quietly, as though she had already accepted her fate. When the verdict was read guilty of manslaughter, Linda didn't cry. There were no tears left. She only felt an empty ache where her heart used to be. Chloe was sentenced to several years in a juvenile facility, with the possibility of parole when she turned 25. After the hearing, as they led her away, she turned to look at her mother one last time. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet sorrow that mirrored Linda's own. Months later, Linda sold the house on Maplewood Lane and moved to a smaller town where no one knew her name. She never returned to the cabin by the creek or the woods that had taken her peace. The people of Brooksville eventually stopped talking about the case, but for Linda, the silence was worse than the whispers. Every night, she lay awake, replaying the moments she might have changed, the warnings she ignored, the signs she dismissed. She had always believed love could protect her daughter from anything, but love, she learned too late, could also blind a mother to the darkness growing right in front of her.